But yeah, these are tricky. And yeah, and I went to another performance in Germany.
Welcome everyone to today's event. This is another test. It seems like things are working well.
Hello, testing, 1, 2, 3.
But I still need to
All right, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome guests, supporters, and all those joining us virtually through YouTube and Facebook. Welcome to today's event. A true sign of the Jerusalem Fund's unwavering commitment to fostering a deeper understanding of Palestine. At the Jerusalem Fund and Palestine Center, we wear many hats, and I'm glad to see that Mazin is wearing one today, all unified under a single goal, to amplify the narrative of Palestine and to better the lives of Palestinians, both at home and in the diaspora. Whether through humanitarian efforts, cultural projects at our Gallery Al-Quds, or the in-depth educational programs of the Palestine Center, we strive to shed light on the Palestinian experience, a story often overshadowed by erasure and censorship. Today, we are honored to introduce a voice that intertwines with our mission, a voice that resonates with hope, resilience, and the undying spirit of liberation, Dr. Mazin Qumsiyah. As our world confronts the aftermath of numerous human actions, most of which are negative, climate change, loss of biodiversity and habitat, and social and economic disparities, it becomes ever crucial to hear voices like Dr. Qumsiyah's. His work, rooted in the very essence of the Palestinian struggle, expands beyond Palestine's borders, touching upon global challenges and bringing forth nature-based solutions that are rooted in the land and the care for the land, something that Palestinians value so much. The ideas and solutions Dr. Qumsiyah will talk about today not only promise sustainability in an abstract manner, they also embody the spirit of collective resistance against injustices, be it environmental, racial, or settler colonial, as in the Palestinian case. Dr. Qumsiyah, a professor at Bethlehem University and the founder of the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability, is no stranger to championing such causes. His vast efforts spans cultural heritage, human rights, biodiversity conservation, and research on issues of the sort. His book, Popular Resistance in Palestine, and numerous other writings stand testament to his unyielding dedication. In a world where adversities loom large, Dr. Qumsiyah's work brings a ray of optimism. His accounts of resilience, especially from Palestine, remind us that even in the face of the gravest challenges, hope prevails. Today's event, Liberating Minds and Nature from Palestine to the World, promises to give us a glimpse of hope for those seeking a path towards a better tomorrow. Drawing from his wealth of experience and insights, Dr. Qumsiyah will delve into transformative stories of struggle, especially from the ground in Palestine. A few housekeeping rules before we proceed. After Dr. Qumsiyah's presentation, we will have a dedicated Q&A session. For those present in person, please wait for the microphone before posing your question. And for our audience on YouTube and Facebook, kindly drop your questions in the comments section and we will do our best to address them. Today isn't about understanding the challenges before us. It is about inhibiting the spirit of resilience, unity, and hope that Palestine and voices like Dr. Qumsiyah inspire. So without further ado, Dr. Mazin Qumsiyah.
Thank you very much for coming. Everybody, really honored to be here at the Jerusalem Center. Of course, Jerusalem Fund has done tremendous work, and there's really we tip those hats to to people who have started here, Edmund Gharib and Hisham Sharabati and others, who really preceded us, Edward Said, who taught us a lot of things. So what is the nature of what I want to talk about? I mean, I'm on this kind of a tour of the United States. This is my wife, Jessie, by the way. She just got her Palestinian ID card after about 15, 16 years of waiting for family reunification, so to speak, as if I need the permission of the Israelis to be reunified with my wife. But anyways, so she's traveling with me. We're traveling around the United States, about 12 states, giving maybe 40 to 45 talks or so. And I try to speak about some aspects of what we do, but also some aspects of what's going on in Palestine. And usually in the question and answer session, they want to ask me about other things, like also what's happening now on the ground with the inter-Zionist demonstrations between the right-wing Zionists and the ultra-right-wing Zionists, or in the Palestinian Authority and what's happening in the Palestinian situation. And I'm happy to answer those questions. I won't make them part of my formal talk at this point. Because as Jihad said, I want to focus a little bit on the aspects of what can be done. Now, the Palestinian situation, of course, is not a very unique situation. Perhaps the only uniqueness about it is that it remains unresolved. The last basically colonial, well, there is maybe Morocco and the Sahara, China and Tibet, but really it's a bit more unique in the sense that Israel sits on top of Palestine, not Morocco in Sahara, you know. So that, and it remains unresolved to this day. So why is that? And is also a subject I'm not going to preach too much about. I'm not going to cover much about the history of Palestine, what happened in this Fertile Crescent. I'll skip those things. I do want to say that Palestine has always been multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious, and even multilingual society. Before 1948, there were 44 languages spoken in Palestine. And there is an attempt to make it a Jewish state. This attempt, in my humble opinion, is destined to fail if it has not failed already, since between the River Jordan and Mediterranean, there are more non-Jews than Jews. And even among the Jews, the 48% or so who are Jewish, you find a significant segment, perhaps 25–30%, who are either post-Zionist or anti-Zionist. So in my humble opinion, the Zionist project is failing or will soon collapse. We will go back to being multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious society, and the refugees will have a chance to return to their homes and land. This is something I am certain of. I'm not certain if I'll see it in my lifetime, since we can never guarantee our lifetimes. But, you know, probably 20 years, 10 years, I don't know. Now, you can say I'm too optimistic, and that's, you're entitled to that, of course. What drives my optimism? What drives my optimism is a couple of things. One is that historically Palestine have had such multi-ethnic, diverse society, and this also, and that historically attempts to make Palestine a monolithic society have failed. For example, the Crusaders who tried to make Palestine Catholic. By the way, it had nothing to do with Christian religion or Catholicism. It was for political purposes that they came to Palestine. I won't get into that. But the same thing with Zionism. It's not intrinsic to Judaism to have this. You know, and there were another attempt. I think there was one Muslim ruler and his son who tried to make it a Muslim country. They also failed. All these attempts in the past to make Palestine monolithic failed. So this is one source of my optimism, is our own history. The second source of my optimism is the Palestinian people. Of course, is you know, we're told we're stubborn. You know, even Yasser Arafat once said, you know, try to deal with all these people. So yeah, it's you know, Palestinians are stubborn, resilient, resistant to change, and will not easily yield a country to somebody else. Now, you can look at history of colonialism, of course, and again, I'm not going to delve into history too much, but colonialism ends in one of three ways. Either the Algerian model, where 1 million French packed their bags, went to France, I don't say back to France because they were 6, 7, 8 generations in Algeria. And some of them have never seen Europe in their lives and they had to go. It was very bloody, cost something like 3 million lives and 150,000 French lives also. That's one scenario, rare, by the way. The second scenario is genocide, what happened in the United States, where the natives were slaughtered in large numbers and ended up in reservations. And that map, by the way, of a shrinking United States gave the inspiration for the map above it that my son first drew, by the way, in 1998. This is another possible scenario, also rare. And then the third scenario is for the descendants of the colonizers and the descendants of the colonized to live in one country, as happened in most of the world, you know, South America, Central America, Caribbean islands, Mexico, Canada, all of Europe, all of these things. This is the fate of colonialism. Now, fate of colonialism is one of those three outcomes. Please remove from your mind that there is a potential fourth scenario. Every country that tried to come up with a fourth scenario, like South Africa, tried to come up with a scenario of perpetual apartheid and putting people in their own so-called Bantustans, countries for the Bantu people. They failed. There's no, for example, a quote-unquote two-state solution to a colonial, anti-colonial struggle. Now, colonialism will end. One of these scenarios will happen. I personally hope that the third scenario is the one that's materializing now, and that I hope to see it in my lifetime. Now, the question is really about what is my role and what is your role, what's our role, collective role, to arrive at an outcome. It's not, you know, perfect outcome, of course. The third outcome is not kumbaya. There is still a lot of problems in countries like Brazil between indigenous people and others who came, but at least it gives the hope. South Africa, for example, which I visited also, there's still economic apartheid. There's still problems in those countries, but at least it's a semblance of the future that we can see, which we want. What is the future we want, by the way? And this is very important. I find many of our activists, young people especially, energized, empowered, they always speak about what they are against. We're against Zionism, we're against colonialism, we're against imperialism, neoliberal capitalism, etc. All right, we are against all of these things, but what are we for? What is it that we are for? And I think that has to be articulated. I wrote another book, you know, Jihad mentioned my book on popular resistance, but I wrote another book called Sharing the Land of Canaan, Human Rights and the Israeli-Palestinian Struggle, in which I argue that what we are for is, as I mentioned earlier, is a society that's diverse and that is strong and that is democratic. That's all. It's very simple. What we want, if you want to summarize all of that in 2 words, it's called human rights. That's what we want. Now, human rights sounds like this pie in the sky kind of thing, because also, by the way, even imperialists talk about human rights. And what is human rights? Well, what does that mean? Well, there is a Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1949, of course, which has very good articles. I think the only deficit in it perhaps is economic rights. But I think that's a good beginning to start to look at human rights, like lack of no discrimination based on religion, etc. You know, having rights for everybody, women, men, everybody. Rights also include environmental rights, by the way, the ability to survive in your country, etc. That intrinsically, by the way, develops what we call diversity. and diversity in a healthy way. If you go to a forest and you see only one species of tree, you don't say that's a healthy forest that's going to continue forever. You say this is a forest on the way down. A healthy forest is one in which there is diversity of plants, diversity of animals. I think the same applies to human society. A healthy human society is not one that is dominated, that's a monolithic, let's say a Jewish state or a Christian state or a Muslim state. No, it's a state for its citizens, a state which respects the rights of everybody and which everybody is equal. These seem so badihi, we say in Arabic, what is it? Common sense, you know, logical. It is not something that, you know, is brilliant insight or anything. But the question is how to get to it and how to implement and how to push for it. And I think this is our role as human beings, to always push for that diversity, both biological diversity and human diversity. Now, biodiversity, if I go, this my field is also biological diversity and conservation. Biodiversity, when I say nature is biodiverse, that a nice forest means a lot of different species of plants and animals, that does not mean absence of any kind of friction in it. Sorry, if you go to the savannah, there's lots of frictions, lions eating gazelles and you know, but there is a balance. It's a natural balance that allows that every species continues to survive, right? This is what it is about, not about monolithic or about dominance or about structures like that. Now, I put this picture here because it illustrates the opposite of that, right? It illustrates a lack of balance. When you have white European settlers who came to North America bringing all this beauty, culture, modern agriculture, or Zionists for that matter in Palestine, and those Native Americans and buffaloes are running away, that's not a balance, okay? That's not what we want. So, of course, we humans face many challenges to this system of balance that evolved over millions of years, billions of years, actually, if you want, from the beginning of life, about 4.5 billion years ago. It took a long time to reach the level where we are at. What is threatening it now is this one species called, I think Linnaeus, when he named us Homo sapiens, he was a bit too optimistic that we are sapiens, you know. But this species is really wrecking planet Earth. You know, there are these 6 threats to existence, not just of other species, but even of the human species, you know. Climate change, habitat destruction, pollution, overexploitation, invasive species, and of course, settler colonialism and wars. By the way, this is interesting. The wars, the military is the largest pollutant on Earth in terms of single entities that pollute. The Israeli military, for example, produces more greenhouse gases than all of the West Bank and Gaza combined, the Israeli military alone. So I think it's interesting to deal with those. The other point I want to make about this slide is that these threats are not separate. They have synergy and they have overlap. Everything is dependent on everything else, which is true of human phenomena, by the way. For example, climate change is, of course, influenced by pollution, influenced by wars, by conflict. There's climate justice issues. There's all sorts of overlap between those 6 threats to our environment. The Palestinian environment, of course, is devastated, just like around the world, by these threats. But we have a little extra, of course, because what's the extra? The extra is that Israel builds itself as a green country. You heard that, right? That it is a country that made the desert bloom, planted trees. This is such a blatant lie. In the same fashion, by the way, that they come up with these lies subsequently to justify their actions of destruction. For example, you heard about the lies that the Arabs wanted to throw the Jews into the sea. When did this lie come about? It came about after the Zionist movements literally threw the Palestinians into the sea, in the ports in Haifa and in Jaffa, where boats were loaded by Palestinians sent to refugee camps in Gaza or in Lebanon. This is when they came up with the idea that, well, if they had won, they would have thrown us into the sea, because we did that to them. So I think the same can be applied for the idea that they are such great stewards of the land. And our studies, I just finished a monograph about environmental justice issues, some 650 references in it that speak about those issues. I'm going to just cite a couple of examples to show you. On the issue of planting trees, for example, Israel actually uprooted far more trees than they planted. When they destroyed 530 Palestinian villages and towns, by the way, they bulldozed all the trees around them, including the domesticated trees like olives, figs, and almonds, but also wild trees like hawthorn, oaks, and carobs. And in place of all these trees they uprooted, they bulldozed, they planted European pine tree. This is also emblematic of the same problem I talked about with diversity. You're taking a polyculture and you're replacing it with a monoculture, right? It makes sense in the context of colonialism. So they planted pine trees. Well, what's wrong with pine trees? Well, this is an example from West Jerusalem, by the way, when pine trees burned. Pine trees are a monoculture. They are very devastating to the environment, but they are also in a dry climate like ours. They are susceptible to fires. So you can see in this case in West Jerusalem, after the fires were put out, they left just the Israeli settlement on top of the hill. It exposed the terraces that our ancestors built over thousands of years, where they had the original agriculture like the olives, the almonds, etc. There was a diversion of the water from the Jordan River Basin, a mega project. There were a number of mega projects that the Zionist movement did in Palestine. This is one of them. This was also not to increase agriculture in the coastal areas. It was for replacement agriculture. The coastal areas, as Edmund would tell you, they were planted by Palestinians, by rain-fed agriculture for thousands of years. Since then, you know, we're part of the Fertile Crescent. This is where first humans developed agriculture, like domesticating wild plants and wild animals. So the coastal areas were heavily planted by rain-fed agriculture of wheat, barley, lentils, chickpeas, hummus. I'm sure you all had hummus before. This is where it was happening. They removed all of that agriculture because they removed the people that were doing this. And they replaced it with irrigated agriculture. That's why they needed this. It's easier. Irrigated agriculture is easier. So irrigated agriculture like cherry tomatoes and avocados and things like that. This is replacement agriculture. This is not new agriculture. Israel did not add, did not add much agricultural land to our country. But diverting the water from the upper areas of the Jordan River was devastating to the Jordan River Basin, as you can even see from the satellite image, desertification on the right side showing. The Jordan River itself, there's a picture on the left, you can see what it looked like before this mega project. And you can see what's left of it. went down from 1,350 million cubic meters per year to 20 million cubic meters per year. It's now basically a polluted stream. Much of the flora and fauna around the River Jordan is gone. So Palestine was never a desert, by the way. This satellite image from the north, I like to show it because I drew on it. The red line is the 400 millimeter rainfall line. And you can see that's where actually things go from semi-arid, 300 or 200 millimeter rain, to 400 millimeter rains, become Mediterranean kind of climate. So southern Palestine, by the way, the only area is in the South Negev, where you find really arid condition or semi-arid conditions, really, and the Sinai Desert, of course. But the rest of Palestine is, of course, a green country. But Israel's diversion of the water from the headwaters of the Jordan River, what it does is it actually made Palestine desert, or beginning to make Palestine desert. As you can see here, this from the color, you can see it's coming this way. So actually, if this trend continues, the rest of it will become a desert area. So instead of making the desert bloom, Israel is making desert, thanks to their mega projects, etc. There was a drying up of the wetlands in the Hula area, which is another example of transformation in our country. The picture on the lower right-hand corner is a Palestinian woman carrying reeds from the Hula area that they harvested. And it was a big center for reed manufacturing, for homes, for other things. These people were kicked out, and so-called swamps, as Israelis like to use the term swamps, they drained the swamps. I hate the word swamps. It's wetlands, you know, people lived there, animals lived there, plants lived there. So what if you have few mosquitoes as part of life, you know? So anyways, so they dried all of that, and 219 species, plus of course the native Homo sapiens, disappeared from the area of the Hula wetlands. Other areas we're doing recently, studying so-called nature reserves that are designated by Israel. The map on the left is an Israeli map that they are very proud of. As you can see, they did it in English to show the world, oh, look, we have all these green nature protected areas that we've created. So it's a peculiar map, actually. When you first look at it, you say, wait a minute, why did they designate those green areas where they are? Well, what's the deal about these green areas? Well, it's very peculiar, for example, that a lot of green areas are in the Galilee and in the Negev, where there are still Palestinians there. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but Yellowstone was the first protected area in the world, designated by national government. When it was designated by Congress back here, many, many years ago, one of the first justifications for doing it as a nature reserve was to exclude the Indians, to exclude the Indians. So Israel learned these lessons about use of nature parks, nature reserves to exclude their Indians, their native people, which are the Palestinians who remain. That's why they designate them. The Negev, for example, you can see, especially in the areas all around the Negev, clearly because they want to exclude the Bedouins and their camels and their sheep and goats from those areas. Now, this is interesting. You would say, well, maybe I'm biased because I'm Palestinian, I'm saying these things. Well, it's very easy to understand the logic because there's actually international guidelines for designating nature reserves. And I challenge anybody to show me where any kind of biological studies done by the state of Israel to designate those nature reserves in the Negev? Not one. In fact, guess who sets those nature reserves in the Negev and draws their borders? Which entity sets them? It's not Israel Nature and Parks Authority. It's not the Israeli government even. It's the Jewish National Fund, Keren Kayemet Israel. And Keren Kayemet Israel says on its website, it's a custodian of the land of Israel on behalf of its owners, Jewish people everywhere. Clearly, Palestinians are subhuman. They are not deserving of anything. Okay, second question. Guess how many biologists or naturalists does those who set those nature reserves, the Jewish National Fund, has on its staff? 0, not 1, okay? So clearly they have nothing to do with the nature aspects of what's there. This is peculiar in the world history because at least Yellowstone, they excluded the Indians, but it remained open area. So what does Israel do with these areas that they exclude the natives from? Well, they develop them for Jewish use. An example of this, South Hebron Hills, for example. Many of you heard about the South Hebron Hills and the fact that Israel wants to ethnically cleanse it of Palestinians, and that the Israeli High Court approved removing Palestinians. Well, there's a peculiar thing about the South Hebron Hills, that it's a nature reserve, and on top of the nature reserve, you see the picture in the middle, is the red zone, which is an Israeli military training zone. Israeli military training zone. And there is also Israeli settlements right in the middle of the military training zone and the nature reserve there. So clearly this has nothing to do with nature. When you have tanks like this running all over that place in South Hebron Hills, trampling wild whatever animals and plants that are there, and Israel arrests these young kids for picking wild za'atar, oregano, from the wild, and because they are trespassing on a nature reserve, there is something, why is this more damaging to the nature than this, So I think the evidence is overwhelming, and we're writing research papers about this and publishing them regularly. Now we publish 2 papers every month about the subject. So I think, we need to do more science-based observation. This is, by the way, a school that they demolished in the South Hebron Hills recently. They use the same phenomena for so-called national parks. National parks, by the way, when you use the term national parks in a country like the US, it means it's part of the nation, it belongs to the nation, who are the Americans here, regardless of their religion and culture. In Israel, the word national, by the way, refers to Jews only. A national park, by definition, is a Jewish park, because Israel distinguishes between nationality and citizenship. And the nation for them, the nation is the Jewish nation. Am Yisrael, the people of Israel. So when they designate a national park, which they define it by law as an important area for history and for religion of the nation, they are meaning the Jewish communities, not the Palestinian communities. A good example of this is what's happening around Jerusalem. You heard, for example, of Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan and the troubles there. Every Friday there's demonstration because they want to remove the native Palestinians from these areas. Well, it's because, as you see on their maps, they set up national parks. And these national parks are for the human beings who had the religion and who had the culture and the history and the importance of this area. And who are these human beings? Jews, not non-Jews, because non-Jews are subhuman beings according to the Zionist mentality, if you want. Sorry to be blunt in my language, but that's basically what it boils down to. Because how else do you explain not allowing Palestinians in Silwan and Sheikh Jarrah and all around the old city from even repairing fallen roofs or cracks that happened because Israel is digging tunnels right underneath their houses, and at the same time allowing Jewish settlers from Europe and anywhere else to build high-rise building in the middle of what's supposed to be historical and religious sites of, King David or whatever they come up with. It is clearly about a racist mentality that says that the indigenous people are not human beings, are not part of this religion and history that we consider in our nation, which is why they are called national parks. There is other, of course, damage that is done to natives, including like industrial settlements. There are now 13 industrial settlement groups that each, like this one in Salfit district, that has like 40 industries dumping their toxic waste on the Palestinians, causing genotoxic effects that we study. There's the theft of natural resources in Palestine. You know about water, probably. There's a whole shelf back there about water issues in Palestine and what happened, like the book of Al-Musa, which talks about how, for example, the settlers use 95% of our water, and we end up with the 5%, half of it we have to pay money for Mekorot, the Israeli monopoly on water, if you want. There's the natural gas, for example. The reason Gaza is besieged, by the way, is not because of Hamas, as they like to claim. It is because of these gas fields off of Gaza that Israel is now going to export to Europe to replace Russian gas, because somebody bombed the pipeline between Russia and Germany, and you can imagine who this somebody is. But anyways, the destruction of our nature and our habitats is another example of Israel really a green country that does wonderful green environmental issues. This is what Jabal Abu Ghnaim next to my house looked like in 1997 at the top, and what it looks like at the bottom today as a Jewish-only concrete jungle, if you want. All right. Now, I wanted to talk in this talk a little more about the issue of liberation and mental liberation, from colonization. Somebody asked me in Boston Community College about hope and how we draw our hope, and I just shared that with my email list this morning because Steve Law, who we stayed with in the area of Boston, transcribed my answer to that question and sent it out to his list. And I thought, it was an improvised answer. I could have written better, of course, if I was writing it. But he liked the answer and he shared it, and I shared it on my list. I do have hope, as I mentioned, and I'm optimistic about the future. But when we get to that future, will depend largely on what we do as individuals. As this frog will testify, if you don't resist, you're toast, basically. So, so we have to do something. And we Palestinians, of course, have had a history. As Jihad mentioned, my book, Popular Resistance in Palestine, is subtitled A History of Hope and Empowerment. It's a history not of failure, a history of success. And the Zionists really do not understand what they are dealing with. And they are making mistake after mistake. And it's almost very predictable. Their moves are very predictable. They cannot think outside the box that they put themselves in. I think they really, I mean, they really are making very, very foolish mistakes that will accelerate their demise. We can talk about that also if you want. But I do not want to focus on the diagnosis of the Zionists or what they do to us. I want to focus on us, what we do to ourselves. And of course, you know, we can talk about the negative things, the corruption, the split in the Palestinian movement, the different factions, each with different ideas. We can talk a lot about all the negatives, but I've depressed you enough just with the symptoms of the Israeli environmental catastrophe that's coming on us. So I think we need to switch to talk a little more positive. So what is this history of hope and empowerment? And I wrote another book following that, by the way, but I haven't published it yet. It's been sitting in my computer files for the past 7 years, 97% finished, but I never could find the time to actually edit and submit it and whatever. And that book is titled basically "To Exist is to Resist." And it took 14 chapters, each chapter, because when I wrote Popular Resistance, it was 140 years and in a 300-page book. Actually, when I wrote it, it was double that, and the editor told me we don't publish more than 300 printed pages, so you need to cut it in half. So I removed half of it. But you can imagine trying to summarize 140 years of amazing positive actions. You were able to say one sentence about each action. For example, about the women movement when they brought 120 cars to Jerusalem in 1928 and were driving these cars, peeping their horns. The first demonstration in human history to use automobiles. That would take a book by itself to tell the story, but I wrote it in a couple of sentences in the book. And the same like with the cow story in Beit Sahur, which you heard about, resistance using the cows, throwing the idea. Everyone got a sentence. So some people said, this is not fair, you've got to elaborate. So I elaborated on 14 stories that I think are inspiring, and I wrote it in a book called To Exist is to Resist. I hope I'll publish it soon, if I get my act together. But anyways, we can talk endlessly about this, by the way, but I want to cite just a couple of groups that I'm affiliated with now. Not that, I consider them the most important groups. I actually am involved in many groups, including the One Democratic State movement, including when we were in the US, we created the Palestine Right to Return Coalition. We had the Wheels of Justice bus tour, which traveled around the country, spoke at 1,200 colleges and universities, etc. Now, I do want to highlight a couple of areas. One of them is the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability that Jihad mentioned. But the other one I want to just tell you, because I was just elected president of this club, the Bethlehem Rotary Club. And, under the radar over the past 10 years in the Bethlehem Rotary Club, we've been doing a lot of work. For example, we essentially adopted this orphanage in Bethlehem, where we helped the orphans there. We worked in Gaza with women and others on nutrition aspects. Basically, this is a project that we did in Gaza 4 years ago. I think we finished it. But anyway, 4,500 women, many pregnant women received, advice and counseling and vitamins and things like that. These are just some of the beneficiary children and women in Gaza. And here again. And this was done with support of Japanese Rotarians. which reminds me to talk about something important. If you get a disease, a virus, the most important aspect, like COVID-19, the most important aspect is your own internal B cells and T cells, which fight that disease, right? Now, it doesn't mean you shouldn't get help from outside, chicken soup, vitamin C, zinc, whatever. It helps to get support from outside. So the same for us Palestinians. The ultimate responsibility and health of the system will have to depend on us. But getting support from outside is also very important. Like the BDS movement, boycott, divestment, sanctions in South Africa, was good to have that external support. But ultimately, it's South Africans on the ground who make it the difference. So the same here, I would say, is getting the support from outside is also healthy. So we supplied Caritas baby hospitals with some equipment for their neonatal care unit. When COVID-19 hit us in Palestine, this is also after I spoke in 2019, I think, at the Jerusalem Fund. Right after that, COVID-19 came with a vengeance on us. So we imported equipment for testing, created laboratories that do the testing in the Bethlehem area for the COVID. We also passed out food packages to Palestinians during the lockdown. We distributed so far 35 of these coolers, which you see here, to schools in the Bethlehem region. These coolers provide clean, filtered, cold water to Palestinians. So we are now expanding this project. Hopefully we'll reach 110 schools. This is, by the way, when we had the ceremony for the Paul Harris Awards, and this gentleman here, one of the most active members of our club, died of cancer soon after this picture was taken. He has young children, so now his wife is a member of our Rotary Club. Distributing Christmas gifts, making a community garden. The Rotary collaborated with my institute, the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability, to create a community garden where even the children of the refugee camp come and plant things, grow things. The institute, the Palestine Institute of Biodiversity and Sustainability, as the term implies, or not implies, but says it, it's to support sustainable human and natural communities. And that involves research, education, conservation efforts. This is some of the sections of this institute. It includes a museum of natural history. It includes a botanic garden, a community garden, an ethnography museum, other kinds of facilities, children playgrounds. These are just some pictures. How many of you have been to Palestine, by the way? Those are here. Many of you have. How many of you have been to our institute, the Palestine Institute of Biodiversity and Sustainability? Wow, not a single person. So you are hereby requested and invited to come and visit us. And you will see some things like this: a museum of natural history, a museum of old agricultural tools, and so forth. And we work a community garden, the aquaponic systems on the top, where we grow fish and vegetables. We actually brought people from Gaza and trained them to build these systems. So they are doing it in Gaza now, and even on rooftops of refugee camps to grow their vegetables and their fish. And we work with women regularly and other marginalized groups in our society to enhance their production of organic material and to sell it. We help them with marketing. This is from one of the workshops where we showed them how to use plants from their garden to make cosmetics and other household material. Even you can make toothpaste, by the way, and things like that. So this is some of the work with the children in our institute. We work with thousands of children every year, but recently we even expanded this by creating a mobile museum, which you see in the picture in the upper part. And we went to remote areas like the South Hebron Hills, including that school that they demolished. We visited with that museum. That brings them the history of Palestine, encourages their connectivity to the land, etc. These are just some of the activities there. At the beginning of this month, by the way, we got 5 baby hyenas, rescued hyenas. They were being sold for body parts because of their magical powers, whatever that may be, aphrodisiac or whatever. But anyway, they were rescued, brought to us for raising. And this is one of our international volunteers showing the hyena baby cub to some Palestinian kids. We have an animal rehabilitation unit. We actually released a lot of wildlife after rehabilitation, our center. These are just some more children activities. For me, actually, working with children is the most rewarding part of what we do. And it is a center for building the future, as I said, because we envision a future in which there is diversity. That's a future that we want. And the children learn that because they see nature around them, they see wildlife, they play, they enjoy themselves, but also strengthen their self-esteem. Our motto at the museum is respect. Self-respect as Palestinians first. Second is respect for other human beings. And third is respect for nature, for the animals and plants that are around us. And this is fostered. You can even see it on the shirt on one of the kids there. Respect for environment equals respect for ourselves. This is fostered by the activities that we do. And the activities are about creating an environment for learning. It's not about teaching. I don't lecture to children. I create an environment where they ask questions, they do things by hand. There's a Chinese proverb that goes, I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. So we want them to always be doing things, drawing, whatever. Our team is a diverse team also, Muslims, Christians, Jews, atheists, everybody. Staff and volunteers, by the way. We worked on national projects also, and even international projects. On an international system, we are advisors to things like the Convention on Biological Diversity. We worked on the climate change things. We're part of Extinction Rebellion, Greta Thunberg, if you ever heard of her name. We work to create national reports, like this one of our reports on the right. We redesignated those nature reserves in the West Bank that Israel designated for political purposes. We designated them based on scientific principles, including working with the IUCN, International Union of Conservation of Nature, experts to do this. We created the new National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, which will guide our work for the next 30 years to 2050. Our success has been phenomenally fast, much faster than even I had envisioned when I had big dreams about the Institute. For example, our first 5-year strategy, which we put together, people told me, it's too ambitious. You're not going to be able to do this, open a museum and a botanic garden, all of this within the first 5 years. Well, we actually finished the 5-year targets by the 3rd year. And it was 2017 when we opened to the public. So we've been accelerating our work. It's thanks to the people that work with us. Here are just some pictures of the people that work with us, staff and volunteers. This woman, by the way, is an Israeli woman. Her name is Zohar. She lived with us for 2 years as a full-time volunteer, just like me and Jesse are full-time volunteers. She was with us also full-time volunteer. We provide volunteers, by the way, with room and board. These are just some of the volunteers picking olives or making apricot jam or working in the garden or making a biogas unit in the upper right-hand corner, or simply cooking and eating together. So, as I said, the Zionists are in a box. We, on the other hand, do not even believe in existence of boxes. They constructed the imaginary box around them. So we continue to dream big, and we just put here on this side a couple of posters. One of them is this one, showing what the museum will look like in a couple of years. Again, people tell me you're unrealistic, you're not going to do this in 2 years. Here's what it looks from the back, and here's the whole complex. But we'll see. I've already raised 70% of the money I need for this. So I need 30% more. So if you have a rich uncle or aunt, please notify me. And we take tax-deductible contributions in the US, a Bethlehem University Foundation, which is just around the corner here in Beltsville, Maryland, is happy to receive your donations. This is our logo, which is the Palestine sunbird, which is the national bird of Palestine. But here's our website and our email if you want to email us. And I should collect the emails of the people here. If you're not on our email list, maybe somebody could pass a paper and we can collect your emails. If you're not on the email list, I send an email every week, like the one I sent this morning about hope and why we should be hopeful. I'll stop here. I'll show you one more slide just for the heck of it. This is me being arrested a few times. I like the one on the upper right-hand corner because I actually thanked this soldier for posing like this, because he proved that's what's on my shirt is right. It says, got human rights, Palestinians don't. So I said, thank you very much. You proved my point. So I'll stop here and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
What did he say when he fell?
Sorry?
What did he say when he fell?
What is he going to say? He struck his shoulder. And then later I had discussion with him. And
It's working.
so I had discussions with him later, and for actually almost 3 hours while he kept me in the cell with a group of other people. And eventually he started saying, I'm just obeying orders. And I said, well, the Nazis who were tried at Nuremberg used that excuse. They didn't get away with it. So obeying illegal orders is not an excuse. And afterwards, when they took me to the interrogation by the officers that do the interrogation, not the soldiers don't do interrogation, the officer read the list of charges against me, and he apparently had just added one more charge. What was the charge? That I used violence. And I said, what violence did I use? He said, well, you you traumatized the soldier by calling him a Nazi. And I said, I didn't call him a Nazi. He said, I obey orders. And I said, that's not an acceptable excuse to say I obey orders in international law, like happened with the Nazis that were obeying orders. They weren't excused based on that. So.
And on that note, thank you so much for your informative presentation and for the work that you do. And again, thank you all for being here and for those watching online. I only have one question for you, and then I'm sure a lot of our audience members here are eager to hear from you. Could you talk a little bit about your work in the broader context of the ever-growing movement for climate justice, environmental justice around the world? Where do you see Palestine fitting in this growing movement? Is Palestine part of the conversation? Are there limitations on how much we can make it part of the conversation in the context of these movements?
That's a very good question. Palestine, like South Africa, was important for one reason, which is it was like the Achilles heel. It is the Achilles heel of Western hypocrisy. The West speaks about human rights, environment, all of this stuff, while supporting people that are doing the opposite of that. So this hypocrisy, which was manifest in South Africa when Ronald Reagan, this was the first year I was in the US, by the way, this is 1979. I came in September and November, there were elections and Ronald Reagan was elected. And his first speech as president, he spoke about how South Africa is the only democracy in Africa and how we should support it because otherwise there's this domino effect of communists that are going to take over Africa and how the ANC is a terrorist organization, etc. This is Western hypocrisy, right? And South Africa was a good example of this because anybody could point out what you are saying is totally opposite to reality. You're talking about humans and democracy and rights and all of this stuff, but the actual on the ground is different. The same thing for Palestine. It is an Achilles heel of this hypocrisy, in my humble opinion, of imperialism, Zionism, colonialism. It's the Achilles heel of it. So on the environmental front, I think we have a big role to play, not just for our country, but for other countries. I've been asked to actually speak so far at 6 countries to replicate our model of building something that's, in essence, the institute we built is an anti-colonial institute, right? The idea is to build those institutes in other countries and do similar kind of work. So I was invited to speak in Egypt, in Jordan, Uganda, in Nepal, in United Arab Emirates. And I'm telling them this is very important because actually, politics aside, this is very, the most critical issue is to deal with our environment. And you cannot deal with our environment if you, as I said, the Israeli military and what it uses in greenhouse emission, or the US military for that matter, which spends more than like the next 8 or 10 countries combined on its military. You have to fight militarism if you are to be an environmentalist. You cannot be a hypocrite and say, rara, USA and Syria and Ukraine and funding weapons and all of this stuff. At the same time say, well, I'm an environmentalist. Doesn't compute, that's hypocrisy. So I think our role is to provide that knowledge that these things are interconnected, as I explained, and there's synergistic effects between those threats, and provide the example. And we are credible because, first of all, I don't get any government support. I don't get any kind of Jesse and I are full-time volunteers, and we donated actually $250,000 to start this institute. So people see us as credible, and they believe us because we're working based on science, and we're working with noted scientists, like from the International Union of Conservation of Nature, like from the Natural History Museum in London. We're doing environmental DNA. We're doing work that's published in peer-reviewed scientific journals. The Zionist movement is going berserk about it. The number of papers that we are publishing, every one of them has the word Palestine in the title. So they are like, well, what are you doing? And their scientists are not doing as good a work as we are.
Thank you. Now we'll take questions from our audience members. We'll start here, then Dr. Gharib, and then here, and here. Do you want to take the questions one at a time?
No, I can take more.
All right.
Hi.
Just have to take notes. So I remember.
Thank you. As we all know, there are now unprecedented demonstrations within Israel. I realize that they are not concerned with the Palestinians, but I wonder whether you think there is any significance.
Same question to a certain extent, but first I would like to thank you for your fascinating presentation. It's wide-ranging, and it's also your optimism. And part of what I want to ask you, I'll follow up with what the question we just heard. Your assessment of what's going on inside Israel right now within the Jewish communities. To me, it seems from afar that it is a war or a struggle, conflict of identity, a war of identity that's going on there. And it's not just happening there, we see it here, for example. But how significant is it actually? What is it like? Are we likely to see change? There was recently a very interesting letter that was sent out and was signed by very prominent Israeli academics, some politicians, some even military people, as well as some American Jews and Palestinians as well, called The Elephant in the Room, saying that you can't have democracy. Jihad actually wrote a very interesting article about it. And so is this something that you think is likely to have an impact? Especially, I mean, I was very much impressed with your optimism at the time. Many people feel only despair. And thank you.
Extremely interesting and informative presentation you made there. I've been involved with the Middle East since 1981. I spent 15 years living in Saudi Arabia, Sudan, and Israel.
And people could introduce themselves.
I'm sorry?
Could you introduce yourself?
Mike Iroshis, I'm retired. And the thing I noticed was in 2000, I was in Israel with a team of medical specialists out of Germany and in Jericho, and we were going to looking at building a field hospital for the Palestinians. And we visited one of their hospitals there, and there was all kind of optimism. There was going to be a casino in Jericho International Airport in Gaza. And then we had the Intifada start again. And I think it was a premise because Shamir had gone into a mosque, and that sort of sparked off the Intifada. Everything went downhill. Nothing else continued. I was also in Israel in 1986, and the borders were open. Palestinians were working in Israel proper. Israel had factories and other things in the West Bank and Gaza, employing a lot of the Palestinians. Then we had, again, another Intifada with bombings and people getting killed. And that sort of paranoid the Israelis, where they started closing down the borders, and the Israelis suffered, the Palestinians suffered. So the big question that we always hear about when we talk about Israel and the Palestinians is terrorism. And the paranoia of the Israelis, and maybe it's overkill, some of the paranoia, but when they have their families being killed and the Palestinian people are suffering, Israelis had to bring in workers from outside of Israel to actually take up some of the employment that the Palestinians had. So I keep saying it's a race where the Palestinians and the Israelis are racing each other and they're tripping each other and neither one gets to the finish line. So what's the resolution to overcome
Very
this
good.
fear of the Israelis of terrorism and the cooperation between the Palestinians and the Israelis?
Good, thank you. There was the lady here.
I was impressed that I'm Lorraine Nagy, and I am with the Jewish Voice for Peace. Oh, okay, we go.
Yeah,
I was impressed that you were in Boston. My home in Massachusetts is Cape Cod. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is that because of the Air Force Base, the aquifers are contaminated because of the machines, the weaponry, and the protection against explosion. The Cape has the highest rate of breast cancer in the state of Massachusetts. So why I'm saying that is that whether you're Israeli or Palestinian, the cancer does not, or the contamination is ultimately going to affect you
Right.
all.
exactly.
And so my question is, are you developing among the environmentalists in Israel this idea of that genotoxicity is our collective problem? Is that making an inroad as these military people are building, more weaponry in places like that? So I just wanted you to comment on that.
Hi, I'm Raj Boya. Pardon my ignorance. I grew up in India, and what happened during Second World War to Jews was horrific. But I'm just wondering, were there any conversations around that time to carve out a piece out of Germany for Jews? Because had there been no Second World War, probably there would have been no Israel, I'm assuming. And do you think it would have been far better to carve out a piece in Germany? What are your thoughts on that?
Hi, I'm Neen Sultan. I'm with UNRWA USA. Thank you so much for this talk. This is really fascinating. I have an environmental background, and I'm trying to bring the environmental lens into my advocacy work for Palestine. And my question to you is, what has the receptivity been of the global environmental community to your work? From my experience so far, and I recognize I'm young and don't have as much experience in the field, but my experience in both the environmental field and the Palestine advocacy space, in the environmental field, Palestine's missing from the conversation. In the Palestine advocacy space, the environment is missing from the global conversation. So I'm just curious what your experience has been. Thank you.
One more question and then.
Yeah, I'm ready. Yeah, go ahead.
Then we'll take a answer at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, why, okay, you can, I don't have to press any buttons, good. And I don't have to yell. When you, first of all, I'd like to thank you so much for your presentation. I always learn things when I come to presentations here, and particularly from yours. Showing that map of all the supposed
Put the mic close to your mouth.
yeah, okay.
Lift it up. So
Yeah, okay, this is better. When you showed the map of all those supposed nature conservation places in Nakab and all those green patches, somebody who didn't know better would think that the Nakab area was this rich green agricultural land that the Israelis were again making bloom. Now, if you were to go to any of those any of those supposed green patches in Nakab, what would you find there?
Yeah, okay.
Maybe he could start answering some of the questions.
Yeah, right. As he said, I will need till about 7 o'clock at night, and then I'll be done with answering. I'll try to be brief. Yeah, the demonstration is right that both you and Edmund also asked about. I mean, it's not very difficult to understand. I actually predicted this about 25 years ago. I wrote an article which I have to dig up now and send to you guys, where I predicted what will happen in Israel. I said Israel is gonna, as a colonial state, just like in South Africa, it evolves to become more and more right-wing. And those who want to keep the facade of Zionism having some good side to it, having some Jewish democracy, will increasingly face difficulty maintaining their positions. And this is indeed what happened. Look at labor, for example. Israeli labor was founder, Ben Gurion was labor, and all these people, Peres, Rabin. Now, if Ben Gurion is born again, another guy and runs for elections, he wouldn't get 1% of the vote in Israel, of Jewish votes, because he would be considered too liberal. This is the trend that's expected in colonial and anti-colonial struggles. Why is it expected? You have to ask the question. It is expected because if you're building a society based on racism and exclusion of the other, exclusion of the indigenous people, the only way you as a politician within your own, whether white groups in South Africa or Jim Crow South, laws, politicians or Israeli politicians, the only way you're going to distinguish yourself from the next racist guy right next to you is to be more racist than him. And the more racist you are, the more likely to get more votes. So it's natural for the trend to always be towards the right, until the collapse, of course, which is inevitably will happen. So to come to this, I predicted that this will happen, and that the right will continue to rise, and it will continue to get even worse. I mean, the next elections is not even Netanyahu, who's an extreme nutcase. He will lose to people like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and others who are of the ultra-fascist right. So what is the squabble between Zionists about? It's a very simple squabble. Some Zionists want to maintain the facade of democracy, that we have some sort of democracy with judicial independence, whatever. But of course, they don't have a democracy. They have an apartheid racist regime where the judges are already stacked in favor of Zionism and against the native people. But they want to maintain this facade of democracy. And there are others who said, we don't need this facade. They are the descendants of Jabotinsky, who once famously said, we're colonialists. We should understand that we cannot have this facade of liberalism and democracy and all of this stuff. We should just dispense with all of that and go with the hammer. That's how we should proceed. So that's the squabble about, is that the Netanyahu wants to escape, of course, being labeled corrupt as he is and being sent to jail. So he wants to stack the judiciary with his friends to save him from corruption, and others of his type are going to do that. The people in the demonstrations who wanted this to be a wider issue about democracy, like tried to even raise Palestinian flags in demonstrations, they were yanked out. Only Israeli flags are allowed in these demonstrations. So it's not about the wide democracy. And what you pointed out, the article that says the elephant in the room is this Palestinians. There are 15 million Palestinians. How are you going to have a Jewish democracy when you have 15 million that are voiceless, basically, that have no power? 8 million of us are refugees or displaced people. So without addressing this problem, what this statement that's now already signed, I think, by 1,300 intellectuals and academics, many of them Israelis. I was surprised to see names like Abraham Berg and others on the signatures. Even Benny Morris, I think, signed it, which kind of like, whoa, that says basically you have to deal with this elephant in the room here, which is the Palestinians. Before we talk about, judiciary being assigned by the majority right-wing party or another. So I think it's an internal Zionist squabble, but it is important. Why is it important? Because it exposes this hypocrisy, because it exposes what's happening, and because for us Palestinians, we need to understand what we are dealing with, and for the world to understand what we are dealing with, and not be deluded into thinking that you can have somehow a peace between political Zionism, colonialism, while maintaining this political Zionism, colonialism, and between the native people. You cannot have that. It never happened in history. You have to have either one of those three scenarios I mentioned. This truth is dawning on a lot of Israelis, I think, and more are awakening. And this is what is good about this kind of squabble, is it gives us the leeway to discuss these things and open a discussion at a wider level about democracy and so forth. Now, what you said about what's going on and terrorism and all of this stuff, it's for me, and this links to this somehow, because, many Israelis are also realizing that normalizing with the United Arab Emirates or with Bahrain or Morocco, or even with the Palestinian leadership, Mahmoud Abbas and Hussein Sheikh, is not going to solve their problem. Their problem is much more deeper than that. It's a problem of colonialism, and the problem that they ethnically cleanse another people, and there's an original sin there to be addressed. This original sin, by its nature, involves violence. I cannot come to your home and land, wherever that is, and say, hey, my beautiful house, would you kindly move away so that I can take it over? So it involves violence. Colonialism involves violence. In fact, it's the only tool of colonialism. For the native indigenous people, they have an array of tools. I wrote, as I said, a whole book about the other aspects. Armed resistance is actually a small part of what the Palestinians do. Palestinian resistance is bell-shaped curve of resistance, just like in South Africa under apartheid, or even in Vietnam or anywhere else. The resistance is bell-shaped curve. Most of it is nonviolent resistance. Some of it is armed resistance. All of it is legitimate by international law and should be expected. As a biologist, I say expected. Even if magically I could eliminate that tail that's the armed resistance by some power of God, any statistician will tell you the curve will renormalize. Have you heard that statistical term, renormalize it? Because there are different people, they will behave differently. The ratio of Palestinian civilians killed to Israeli civilians killed in the struggle since 1948 has been 11-1. 11 Palestinian civilians killed for every single Israeli, which some would argue are not civilians because all of them serve in the military, but putting aside that, it's still 11-1. So what can I say about that? There's not much to be done about it. I cannot do anything about that curve. That's natural curve, and it will continue. What I can do is I can educate people that if you want peace, real peace in the Middle East, the Zionist movement should shed the delusion, and it's a delusion. That's why I said they put themselves in a box. They're still thinking of this box, that pacification is peace, that if the Palestinians stop their resistance, if they do this, they do that, then we're okay. I mean, one time I think an Israeli leader, I forget if it was Ben Gurion or somebody, who said, well, if the Israelis put their weapons down, we will be killed. But if the Palestinians would put their weapons down, we would have peace. I mean, to me, it's like, whoa, you know, what are you talking about? You know, this is the most racist statement you can imagine, of course. But, you know, that's how they think, that pacification is a route to what they consider peace for themselves, not peace, as Martin Luther King said, peace is not about the absence of conflict or war. It is about the presence of justice, human rights, equality. And Zionists still think in that mentality, and they think nuclear weapons and walls and F-35s from the US and the US veto and all of these things, and signed agreements with the United Arab Emirates and others are going to save them from the inevitable, you know, writing on the wall. I think they have to rethink their position, not that we have to rethink what we are doing. So regarding, you know, the issue of inroads, both with the Israelis and inroads with the global environmental community, yes, we have a lot of inroads, environmental tools that are provided. And it's not just a gimmick that we are using environment. It is, we are in a catastrophic climate change environment. We are in a problem with, I mean, there's soon going to be more plastics in the ocean, if it's not already happened, more plastics in the oceans by volume, by weight, than fish in the ocean. Imagine, you know, and we are going down this road and people are not even realizing how desperate we are. So it is an urgent matter, and we have to reach out to everybody, to Israeli academics, environmentalists, everybody else, anybody who claims they care about the environment, to show them that you cannot be hypocrite about it. And the same thing with the international community. And the examples I showed you from Palestine are classic examples that, like a pin pricking that bubble of illusions and delusions about the world, that Israel is a green country that had even invented drip technology. This, you know, you hear that. Or that it planted all these trees that are so wonderful, you know, green country. Even they educate about an Australian university. The other day, a guy visited us. He said, I'm disappointed about it, but in a university where I am, they teach about Israeli technology of greening the desert. And I'm like, greening the desert? You know, they created more desert than and they didn't green anything. They didn't plant even 1 acre extra, just replacement agriculture. So we need to educate about that. We have the data for it. And I say scientific knowledge is power. We can make an effect by doing this. I hope I covered all the, or at least bulleted points, but if I didn't, nag on me, please. Yes.
It's the question from about locating Palestine in the global conversation.
And there was a question also about the Holocaust and World War II.
Question about the geographic toxicity. As an example of military base.
Right. I mean, Israel base, so the genotoxicity, you're right, it pollutes for both Israelis and Palestinians. In some cases, the Zionist movement, the Zionist regime takes decisions driven strictly by politics that impact their own population. Take, for example, the destruction of Gaza, electric power plants, the prevention of Gaza from importing equipment to repair sewage treatment facilities, etc. And of course, you need electricity to operate sewage treatment facilities. And now electricity in Gaza is about 1 or 2 hours a day. You cannot have sewage treatment facilities with this kind of electricity. So what happened is Gaza population dumps its sewage into the Mediterranean Sea, which is environmentally catastrophic for the fish in the Mediterranean Sea, etc. But also the sewage flows up north because of the Suez Canal, the currents underwater, rose up to Jaffa and Tel Aviv, and Israelis are literally swimming in the shit of Gaza because their government has a political decision. This is the reality. Now, I do want to address this issue of the Holocaust and whether Israel would have been created with or without the Holocaust. I don't know if, I mean, the Zionist movement was established. The first two Zionist colonies in Palestine were 1880s. Petah Tikva and Rishon LeZion. And then came Herzl, and he accelerated the movement in 1897 and started to bring more Jews into Palestine with arms in the early part of the 20th century, between 1900 to 1921. So the Zionist movement was accelerating with or without the Holocaust. Now, the Holocaust may have accelerated. I don't know. We never have the alternative to measure. But it's kind of interesting also because the Zionist movement, for example, was not interested in saving Jews during the Holocaust. They were interested in promoting the Zionist project in Palestine. That's why they signed an agreement with Hitler. That's why they sent him a congratulatory letter when he introduced the racial laws in 1933. They sent him a letter that says, Mabruk, congratulations. What you are doing is exactly what we want to do in Palestine. We don't believe, we like you, we don't believe Jews belong in Europe. They belong in Palestine, and we want to introduce racial laws like the ones you have just introduced in Germany to prevent intermarriage and all of this stuff, because we also believe in the purity of races, etc. This is the logic of Zionism that, of course, explains why Netanyahu is buddies with people like Modai or the Hungarian guy, whatever his name is, who are right-wing fascists, anti-Semites. Many of them are anti-Semites, by the way. They hate Jews, like the right-wing in Europe that Israel is associated with. Why do they do that? Because they believe in the same philosophy, which is a philosophy that's antagonistic to our philosophy of diversity. It's a philosophy that's based on purity of race, purity of tribalism, if you want. This is what they believe in. And I think we have to call them on this, and we have to reject it and not try to cajole it by imagining that they are somehow good for the Jews. I'm sorry, Zionism is the worst thing that happened to Judaism in 2,000 years. This is not my quote. This is from a Jewish guy, by the way, who said this. So I think, we have to really understand what is going on. Jeff Halper, who is evolving in his thinking even, he's not there yet as I would like him to be. But even he went in front of the United Nations and said, Zionists lied to us. They told us this about Jewish safety. And a Jew in Berlin today is safer than a Jew in Tel Aviv. You cannot have safety by oppressing another people. It's true. There are actually 300,000 Israelis who live in Germany today. Israelis who had previously lived in Israel now live in Germany. So things are changing and people are becoming more aware, and we should speak more truth to power and not try to fit within the doctrine that they set up for us somehow, that Israel is a safety for Jews, it's an insurance policy for Jews, all of this stuff. This is delusions. This is not reality.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you all for being here today, for joining us. I have two announcements to make before we conclude. Next Friday, August 25, we are hosting Professor Muhammad Sawa'i, who teaches at the University of Virginia, for a book talk about his translation of poetry, the 10th generation's Palestinian poems. Professor Sawa'i translated a group of Palestinian works of poetry to English, and he will be here next Friday at noon, the same time like today, to talk about his book and there will be copies to purchase. And on August 30th, Wednesday, August 30th at 6 p.m., we are hosting a documentary screening. The documentary is called Resistance Climbing. It's a rock climber who goes to the West Bank and captures aspects of the occupation through his experience. So, if you haven't signed up for our mailing list, please do. We will be sending reminders about those emails. And as always, we're always happy to welcome you here. And again, thank you so much for coming today. And thank you again, Dr. Qumsiyeh, for your great talk and
I'm happy to hang around if any of you want to chat or whatever.